When you look around at the world, the hills, the valleys, the coastlines, it all feels so permanent, right? Like it's been here forever and will be here forever. But it's not. It is constantly being reshaped by these incredible unseen sculptors. These are powerful forces working in super slow motion, turning mountains into sand and carving canyons out of solid rock. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and tell their story.
So, let's start with the big question. Have you ever really thought about it? How does a massive, solid mountain, something that seems eternal, get broken down, carried away, and end up as one single tiny grain of sand on a beach somewhere? Well, that's the incredible journey we're going to follow.
All right, so our journey begins with what I like to call the Great Rock Breakup. The very first step is a process called weathering. And the key thing to remember here is that this is all about shattering solid rock right where it stands, without moving it even an inch. You can think of it as the initial attack, the thing that weakens the giant before it can be moved.
Now, weathering comes in two main flavors. On one hand, you've got mechanical weathering, which is exactly what it sounds like, pure brute force. It's all about smashing, cracking, and physically tearing the rock apart. But on the other hand, you have chemical weathering, and this one is more of a silent, sneaky attack that actually dissolves the rock from the inside out by changing its very chemistry.
So what does this brute force actually look like? Well, first up, you've got frost wedging. It's basically nature's crowbar. Water gets into a crack in a rock, then it freezes overnight. When water freezes, it expands by a whopping 9%, and that expansion acts like a wedge, literally prying the rock apart. Then there's something called exfoliation. Just imagine a rock that formed deep underground under all this immense pressure. When erosion finally exposes it at the surface, all that pressure is released, and the rock starts to peel off in layers, kind of like an onion. In dry climates, you can even have salt crystals growing in cracks that do the same thing. And finally, there's good old abrasion. That's just rocks smashing and grinding against each other in a river or a landslide, getting smaller and rounder with every single hit.
Okay, now for that silent attack. With oxidation, the oxygen in our air reacts with any iron-rich minerals in the rock, and it causes the rock to rust, just like a piece of metal would. It weakens it and makes it crumble. That's why you see so many incredible red rocks out in desert landscapes. Then you've got carbonation. This is how we get magnificent caves. Rainwater actually absorbs carbon dioxide from the air, which makes it a really weak acid. But over thousands of years, that weak acid is strong enough to dissolve entire rocks like limestone, carving out these huge underground worlds. And finally, there's hydrolysis, where water itself chemically attacks minerals like feldspar, that's the really tough stuff in granite, and turns it into soft, weak clay. And of course, you can't forget about life itself. We've also got biological weathering. This is the amazing work of things like powerful tree roots wedging their way into cracks and splitting boulders, or animals burrowing and digging, and even tiny lichens on a rock's surface, releasing chemicals that slowly dissolve the very thing they're living on. It's a slow-motion force, but it is absolutely relentless.
So, we've done it. We've successfully broken our mountain down into a billion smaller pieces. But you know what? That's only half the story. Now all those little pieces have to actually go somewhere. And this next stage of the journey, this is what we call erosion. This is the one thing I really want you to remember. If weathering is the breaking, then erosion is the taking. It's that simple. It's the physical removal and the transportation of all that broken down material. And this job is handled by 4 powerful agents: water, wind, ice, and good old gravity.
So let's meet the main movers in this global transport system. We're talking about water, ice, and wind. Each one of them has a totally unique style when it comes to picking up our rock fragments and carrying them on their long journey.
First up is water, the relentless carver. And it can all start with something as small as the impact of a single raindrop hitting the ground and knocking a particle of soil loose. From there, it scales up to thin sheets of water washing across the land, and eventually that flow gets concentrated into powerful streams and rivers that carve out those iconic, deep, V-shaped valleys you see in mountains. Water is just an absolutely relentless sculptor.
Next up is ice. And listen, if water is a carver, then glaciers are like continental bulldozers. As these immense rivers of ice slowly grind their way downhill, they literally pluck huge rocks right out of the ground. Then they use those rocks frozen into their base to scour and grind the bedrock below. This is what carves out those massive, unmistakable, U-shaped valleys you find in places like Yosemite or the Alps.
And then you've got wind, the picky thief.
See, wind can't move boulders, but it is an absolute master at lifting and carrying away all the smaller particles, like sand and silt. It can even use those flying particles to sandblast and sculpt rock surfaces over time. This process is most powerful in really dry, desert areas where there's not much vegetation to hold the soil down.
Okay, we've talked about water, ice, and wind. But what happens when that fourth agent, gravity, decides to take charge all at once? Well, that's when things get really dramatic. We're talking about a process called mass wasting.
This is basically erosion in a huge hurry. You get things like rock falls, where single rocks just break loose and tumble down a cliff. You get massive landslides, where a gigantic slab of a mountainside just gives way all at once. And you get these terrifying mud flows, which are often triggered by heavy rain, that just surge downhill like a river of wet concrete, carrying away everything in their path.
But gravity can also be incredibly, almost unbelievably slow. A slump is when a big chunk of Earth slides down as a single piece, kind of rotating as it goes. But creep is even slower. It's this imperceptible downhill movement of an entire slope. I mean, it's so slow, the only way we even know it's happening is by looking at its effects. Things like tilted fence posts and those really odd curved tree trunks that are trying to grow straight up while the very ground beneath them is slowly moving downhill.
Okay, so let's recap. We've shattered our rock, and we've carried it halfway across the country. But where does all that material actually end up? This brings us to the final and maybe the most amazing part of our story, deposition. This is the constructive part.
This is the grand finale. Deposition is exactly what it sounds like. It's the point where those agents of erosion, the water, the wind, the ice, finally run out of energy. They slow down and they have to deposit their load. It's the end of the long journey for our rock fragments as they are finally laid down to rest in a brand new place.
And here's the beautiful final twist in the story. This whole cycle isn't just about destruction, it's also about creation. Every single one of those agents of erosion builds something new. Rivers drop all their sediment to form huge deltas and fertile floodplains. Wind piles up sand to create majestic, sweeping dunes. When glaciers melt, they leave behind these long ridges of rock and debris that we call moraines. And even gravity's rockfalls pile up at the bottom of cliffs to form what we call talus slopes. So you see, from the debris of an old world, new landscapes are constantly being built.
So the next time you look out your window, I want you to think about these unseen forces that are always at work. You know, is that a tiny crack in the sidewalk maybe caused by frost wedging? When it rains, is the water carrying a little bit of soil down the street? The slow, silent work of weathering and erosion is happening all around us, all the time, constantly sculpting and reshaping our world, one single grain of sand at a time.